T minus 30 seconds. T minus 20 seconds. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to Kush'S Korner here on the Trap Talk Reptile Network, the coolest reptile network in the world. Tonight, I have the pleasure of sitting down with Summer of Summer Snakes to talk all things Pituophis. She has, without a doubt, one of the absolute best collections in the entire world of Pituophis, producing some absolutely incredible snakes. And she also has the unique perspective of being somebody who grew up in the reptile industry. And I'm excited to talk about that as well. But before we get into the conversation, as always, USARC. So USARC is the organization that is fighting for our rights to keep our reptiles, to run our reptile businesses, and to live this lifestyle that we all enjoy so much. Please check out usarc.org to learn everything you need to know about the organization. If you are not already a USARC member, please look into becoming one. As a community, we have strength in numbers, and the more people that are behind the cause, the better. And tonight we are brought to you by Gary Scavino of GS Reptiles, an absolute OG in the hobby, one of the leaders in the fields of green tree pythons, emerald tree boas, carpet pythons, Boland's pythons, Zanzinia, you name it. If it lives in a tree or in a semi-tree, Gary is probably your go-to guy. He also has one of the best reptile-related YouTube channels out there, GS Reptiles on YouTube. So if you are looking for some of the best reptile-related YouTube content out there, I highly suggest checking out GS Reptiles on YouTube. And we are also brought to you tonight by David Brahms of the Reptile Perch. So David is the individual who innovated the 3D printed tub perching system used for arboreal snakes and other reptiles, but was originally designed for green tree pythons, carpet pythons. I've used it with scrub pythons, with mangrove snakes. They are very useful products. Check out thereptileperch.com to see all of his products and availability. He also breeds high-end green tree pythons as well, which you could also find at thereptileperch.com. We're also brought to you by Elijah Armas of Juggernaut Reptiles, one of the leaders in the blood python and short-tail python industry here in the United States. They also work with green anacondas, ball pythons, Sanzinia, and more. But particularly if you are looking for bloods and short tails, I highly recommend checking out Juggernaut Reptiles. They have some of the absolute best stuff in the game in the US. And last but most certainly not least, we are brought to you by the Reptile Super Show. So the next Reptile Super Show in Pomona, California is actually coming up next month, January 11th and 12th. I will be there. MJ will be there. A lot of your favorite reptile people will be there. And I mean, in my opinion, potentially the best show in the entire country. I highly recommend checking it out. If you are anywhere close to the Reptile Super Show geographically, you have no excuse to miss it. And if you are in the US or really anywhere in the world for that matter, looking to travel for a reptile show, I would absolutely recommend checking out the Reptile Super Show. Always a great variety of species there, not just the same monotonous stuff you see at a lot of reptile shows. And more than anything else, lots of great people. So you can check out the Reptile Super Show website for ticket information. Again, that is January 11th and 12th coming up next month. And here we are, all of the sponsors out of the way. Thank you guys for tuning in live here on YouTube or catching us after the fact. If you are a YouTube watcher or listener, please give us a subscribe. It would be most appreciated. There's a new podcast that drops here on the channel every single day of the week from some of the best hosts in the game, covering a whole host of topics from within the reptile industry. So if you are looking for reptile podcasts, there are never a shortage of them over here. We're also on the audio platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcast, Buzzsprout. Eesh, that one didn't come out well. Too bad this is live. I can't do that again. Buzzsprout. And wherever else you get your audio content, your podcasts, a subscribe and a 5-star review on any of those platforms would be most appreciated. Shout out to everybody who is already in the live chat and everyone who is watching. But without further ado, let's get into this conversation with Summer. Hey, Summer, how's it going?
Hey, it's going great. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time tonight. So I guess for everyone who is listening, who is not already familiar with you, kind of give us a little bit of a rundown of your life and times in reptiles, what brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. I grew up actually around reptiles. So my parents are Dan and Colette Sutherland, and they are TSK, or the snake keeper. I grew up with ball pythons pretty much. That's what mostly of what they did during my childhood and everything. They did actually have colubrids when I was very little. But then they got into the ball python game, when it kind of got really big. They were like one of the pioneers for that.
Yeah.
And so I was out in the snake room all the time as a kid, and I loved going out there and helping my mom and dad. And they wouldn't let me help that much as a really little kid, but eventually they put me to work once I got old enough, and I just kind of fell in love with all of that. And living out in California where I lived, it was actually we were able to go and catch gopher snakes like in our backyard.
Okay.
And so I fell in love back then with the Pituophis, and then finally, once I was old enough, I went ahead and bought my first ones at a reptile show. Actually, it was in Las Vegas.
Okay.
And I was like, Dad, I'm gonna get these, and he's like, okay, well, go ahead. And I went and I bought them, and I was so excited. It turned out they were actually both females, which was fine. But that's where it all started, and those were the first two I got. They were some San Diego gopher snakes, albinos, and it's expanded a lot since then. So,
yeah, I'd have to imagine that having your parents be reptile breeders are like the easiest parents to convince you to let you get your first snake. Like that had to be, you had to have the easiest time out of probably anybody I know with that one.
Well, yeah, my mom wasn't scared of snakes, so that helped a lot.
Yeah. Oh man. So was it always something that you were drawn to? Were your parents like, hey, come check this out? Was it like, how did that go? Because I as we were talking about before the show, I know a handful of people who, came up in the industry, and most of them were not drawn to it. If anything, they were like, oh God, mom and dad are in there again doing that stuff. So what was that like?
Yeah, I guess I was just always really drawn to it. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I just had a fascination with them, I suppose. I'm not really sure what word I could use to really describe it, but I was definitely always out there seeing what mom was doing, when she would take new babies out of the incubator that had just hatched. Like that was the coolest thing for me. I thought that was just the best thing ever. So
I imagine so. Were you drawn to the ball pythons early on, or was it always something that you were like, this is what my parents do, I want to have my own thing?
No, I really did like the ball pythons, and I still do.
Sure.
I love working with them, and that's my normal job, and so I really enjoy that. I think the taste of the Pituophis just came from maybe just my childhood experiences with them, and that's kind of where it came in. When I was, I don't know, teenage years, I thought that maybe one day I would actually just become TSK and just carry on, their name and everything.
Sure.
And there's still talks of that. Mom and dad are getting to that point in life where maybe they're considering retiring or not, or they'll just scale it back down to more of a hobby level. And that's up to them to decide, of course. But I think at this point, back when I started, really, I think I bought my first ones in 2015, if I'm remembering right. And so I was just out of high school. So I was kind of getting to the point where I could really start doing my own thing too. And it just became something where I was good at it. And so before, I had actually had a leopard gecko collection. Most people don't actually know about that. But I had a small leopard gecko collection of 20 or so. And I actually loved those as a kid. They were my favorite. They used to have like the petting zoos at the reptile shows. And it was like, I wanted to go hold the leopard gecko. That was my favorite one to go hold. And anyway, I tried those and I was successful, but I figured out that I'm just not really a gecko person. And I was like, okay, we need to go back to like my roots, and my roots are snakes. And so anyways, the Pituophis just always drew me in. It was something that my parents weren't really working a lot with, and it was something that I was really interested in just because of not just like size or anything like that, but just like their attitude, the cool fact that they're native to the United States, which is pretty fascinating, and just the variety is like awesome, I think. So
Yeah.
anyways, something that wasn't really out there a ton, and it was something that was also cheap enough that I could actually get into. The ball python game was kind of pricey still,
Sure.
but colubrids were more of my level. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I actually I bred leopard geckos in high school as well, and they're great animals. They're incredible, and it's a great breeding project to start off with because they are pretty prolific.
yeah,
And like, I don't know, for me, it kind of just seeing eggs hit the ground, seeing babies come out, like kind of gave me confidence of like, okay, I mean, if I can breed these, inevitably I can work my way up to breed and other stuff as well. And
sure.
kind of learn how to like manage a project, you know, through something that's, I guess a little bit more of a beginner level species. I don't like to categorize things like that because I almost feel like that can kind of like minimize what they are. They're not just a beginner animal. They're awesome. But yeah, they're really fun. What were the Pituophis that your parents had before you really decided to dive deep into them?
So they were working with the Applegate, San Diego's. So
Okay.
they had a few pairs of those. They had some of the dire albino San Diego's, and
Okay.
then they picked up, I think it was just a pair of flames, the bull snakes, and
Okay.
those were pretty neat. Those ones had a lot more attitude than the San Diego's, so that was kind of exciting. I think that was pretty much the only pits that they had picked up
Okay.
before I had really gotten into it.
Okay. Cool. Did you go to a lot of shows with them growing up, vending and whatnot?
As many as I could that were local
Okay.
anyway. And so when we still lived down in California, they went to like pretty much all the ones that were around California. So I
Mhm.
went to a lot of the LA shows or San Diego or just those ones pretty much. It wasn't until I got older that they started taking us further
Okay.
to some of the other shows. And then when we moved to Utah, once I started working for them, they would take me down to some other different shows. I've been out to Chicago once, and
Mm.
then different Vegas and California. I don't think I ever been to any of the other like Texas or Arizona or
You've been called out about
oh
your
boy.
first mode of transportation at a show.
Yep, no,
Yeah.
that's probably true. I don't remember that, but
How do you think that impacted your growth as far as like figuring out what you wanted to really focus on? I mean, a lot of people, they kind of figure that out as they go, and they don't really have the ability to kind of try things out without owning the animal themselves. Like, aside from just being around your parents' collection, did going to shows kind of help you mold your taste a bit?
um I don't know, that's hard to say, I guess. I
Yeah.
mean, at some point when I was in high school or high school years or whatever, when I was working for them, like I got to take on a much bigger role with the snakes. It wasn't just like the maintenance of like, here,
Mm.
clean the dirty cages, And
Yeah.
so they actually pretty much let me take over the colubrids entirely,
Okay.
more or less. Um, and then like my early college years. So pretty much like
Mhm.
I worked with the colubrids day in and day out. I was the one putting them together for breeding. I was the one taking the eggs, putting them in the incubator, taking
Yeah.
care of the babies. Like I did everything. And so once I was like, oh, this is literally like, 1+1 = 2. Like I
Mhm.
can do this, And so I wouldn't really say that the shows contributed a lot to it. Because the shows are fun, and I'm not hating against shows. As a kid, sometimes they were hard to sit through. It was a very long day as a little kid, and
Yeah,
as
for
my
sure.
dad so nicely commented, yeah, as a little kid, I would sleep under the table because it was so long.
Yeah.
And so
As an adult, it's that long. I wish I could sleep under the table at some shows.
Yeah, sometimes, right? I mean, there was always that buzz of going to a show. It was really exciting. I still love going to the shows and meeting people, especially
Yeah,
now that it's more of like my own thing. It's fun for people
sure.
to come up to the table and recognize me. They're like, "Oh my gosh, you're Summer." I'm like, "Yep, that's me," you know?
Yeah,
So, but yeah, I wouldn't really say that that contributed a ton, but it's definitely like a fun side of it.
yeah, absolutely. So kind of before we get into some more nuts and bolts of the Pituophis, I think a lot of the people who would be listening on this channel would be upset if I didn't ask you about the green tree pythons a little bit. Your parents have some legendary green tree pythons that they've had over there over the years. So
Yeah, no, they have. I wish that Arctic Blue was still around because he was probably one of the most well-known ones. But
Mhm.
it was fun walking in and seeing a blue snake in the room every day. That was pretty incredible.
Yeah, kind of the polar opposite of a pit is a green tree python.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I'm pretty good about just walking in and picking up pretty much any one of my snakes, but there's no walking in and picking up a chondro for me in that room. So I'm
Yeah.
not that person.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I mean, to each their own. A lot of people like that. They kind of sit there and do nothing. But I don't know. I like when my snakes move around. I like seeing them. I like seeing them do stuff. So yeah. I mean, you have a very diverse collection of Pituophis. I mean, would you say you have most of the available types represented in your collection?
Um, yeah, I would say that. I don't work with either of the ESA species, which is the
Mhm.
black pine or the Louisiana pine. So I don't work with either of those just because of the permit requirements on those.
Sure.
And then there's just like some of the other California species that I don't work with, some of the smaller ones. Any of the island ones I don't have right now.
Uh,
And I don't know if I ever will. And then there's some of the other ones like the Pacifics. I'm not working with any Pacifics right now. And then I mean there's like 8 species in California alone. So I
oh,
pretty much only work with the Great Basins, which are found there, and then the San Diegos.
okay.
And then I do have some capes. I guess that's probably the only ones from California. So any of the other ones like the Pacifics or the island, I don't
Sure.
work with those ones. But anything else that I can think of right now, I pretty much have.
Yeah. Awesome. So functionally speaking, with so many snakes, how's your room set up, and then how do you do your brumation?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm obviously like pretty fortunate with my setup. Shout out to
Mhm.
mom and dad. Thanks. So we already have like a big facility and we have
Mhm.
the snake room already set up. So mine are just, they're just set up in the racks. I have my own aisle pretty much. I actually there's 2 aisles. There's the baby aisle and then the adult aisle. And so I
Okay.
share space with theirs also.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I have my own space in their room, which is really nice of them. And for brumation, it's really cool that we do have the warehouse set up. So there's like front offices to the warehouse. There's like a
Okay.
couple rooms up there. So we're able to actually just wheel them into a separate office
Oh,
and
cool.
set the temperature, and they just sit there and chill out for a couple months. So
Nice. Wow, that's really convenient.
it's awesome. Yeah.
Is the main room set up to run entirely on ambient, or are you running supplemental heat on your racks?
Yeah. So the room, it does get set at like, well, right now in the winter, we just try to keep it like above 70. I think
Mhm.
it's actually set for maybe 72 right now.
Okay.
And so the room stays like 72 for winter. In the summer, it sometimes gets up to like 80. So it does like fluctuate with the seasons here because we
Sure.
have pretty drastic seasons here.
Okay.
And then I do run heat still on all the racks. And so usually it's set between like 80 to 82.
Okay. Nice. So nothing too crazy.
No, nothing crazy.
Okay. And what's the temperature that you're using for your brumation?
They're set at 55.
Okay.
Yeah, so I like wear a jacket in there.
Yeah. Yeah. So Do you do any sort of like ramping period before or after brumation, or do you just kind of go right in, right out? Because I've heard people doing both.
Yeah, no, I stop feeding them like 2 weeks before I'm putting them down. And usually, since pits have such a very fast kind of digestive system, they're usually empty within that amount of time.
Yeah.
And so I stop feeding them like 2 weeks before. And then usually, like 3 to 5 days before, I'll go and I'll unplug the racks that they are currently sitting in. They're like permanent racks, I guess. So I'll unplug them. So then they'll get down, a few more degrees. So down to ambient temperature. So then maybe they drop like, 10-ish degrees or so. And then I do actually move them into separate cages because the big racks don't actually fit through a doorway. And
Okay.
so I move them into the new cages, and then they sit in those for another day or two, and then we just wheel them straight in. This time I did kind of do a little bit of a gradual drop down to 55. So I think when I wheeled them in, I had it set at 65. And then the next day I put it at 60. Then the next day I did 55. And
Okay.
so that's what I did going in this year because we were actually pretty warm this year. And so the room wasn't quite as chilly. And so I kind of gradually did it this year. And then when I take them out in February, I probably will just kind of wheel them straight into the snake room and just let them warm up for, 2 days,
Mhm.
put them in their own cages again, and then I'll turn the heat on shortly after that so that they can start like waking up, getting ready to eat and everything.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, that's kind of roughly what I've heard. I've heard of people like doing longer periods where like over a month they slowly drop temperatures, and I don't know. To me, it just doesn't seem there's such hardy like the like adaptable snakes that it doesn't seem to be something that like I keep a lot of montane rattlesnakes, and they're a lot more sensitive as a snake that has to get cold. So I could see with something like that dropping at 20 degrees over the course of a few days might be detrimental, but Pituophis, you could, damn near drop a brick on it and it would be fine.
Oh, pretty much, yeah. I mean, it's like pretty realistic too, though. I mean, sometimes like you
True.
have a cold snap overnight and they just,
Yeah,
find a hole in the ground, right? So,
very true.
yeah, that's what they do in the wild.
Yeah, fair enough. So once you bring them up, how long are you letting them adjust before you put first meals into them, and then I guess subsequently starting to pair up and whatnot?
Yeah, so typically, like I said, so we usually take them out like President's Day weekend, so mid-February,
Okay.
and they have their first meals within about a week of them,
Okay.
getting back to like being their 82 temperature.
Yeah.
And then usually I actually pair them up that last week of February.
Okay.
So, oh yeah, they get their first meal and then a couple days later they're together.
No
So,
time wasted.
nope. Honestly, sometimes that's not even early enough for some of them. I've missed a couple because
Really?
they're just early goers, I guess.
Hmm.
But yeah.
Interesting. So no business of waiting for a shed or anything. It's just one meal and off to the races.
In my room, that's the way it works. Yeah. I know
Yep.
some people do really track sheds and everything like that.
Sure.
The only shed that I actually care to track is the pre-egg laying shed,
Sure.
But otherwise, like, nope. I don't track that at all. I'm like, all right, here's some food. Let's get you together. I'll check. And then
Yeah.
about a month and a half later, once they shed at that point, I'm like, that's the one I'm waiting for.
Okay, so between coming out of brumation and their prelay shed, you're not seeing another shed. It's just straight into breeding and prelay after brumation, generally speaking.
I mean, they usually do shed, coming out of brumation at
Okay.
some point within the first, I don't know, maybe within the first 2 weeks or so.
Okay.
Um, but like that one, I don't care about, I guess.
Sure.
And so usually I can really tell with my females. I watch them pretty closely,
Yeah.
and once I have a confirmation on a breeding, then I know like, all right, they're swelling up. Sometimes they'll stop eating, and at that point,
Mm, yeah.
they'll go into the blue, and I'm like, okay, this must be the one.
Yeah. So do you keep pairing up until you see either like an ovulation or just a very swollen state of the snake? Are you waiting for her to go off of feed, or by the time you see a copulation or two, do you feel confident in your breeding?
Usually I keep pairing them up until they go into the blue.
Okay.
Um, I don't often catch ovulations in the pits. It's not.
Sure. It can be tough.
I've caught a couple before that are more obvious, but it's not like opening a ball python's cage and you're like, oh my gosh.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
no, I usually just keep throwing them in until they go into the blue. And at that point, I'm like, all right, that seems like it's locked in.
Sure. And so with that kind of plan, do you keep a pretty even sex ratio with your adults, or do you sometimes have males go into multiple females during a breeding season?
Yeah, sometimes that can also change it just a little bit. I usually try to not stretch a male to more than 3 females. That's kind
Okay.
of like my rule of thumb for now. When I've stretched them further than that, usually I just don't get as fertile clutches, and
Sure.
so I just try not to do that too much, especially with the younger males. I try to only do them till maybe 1, maybe 2.
Okay.
So anyway, I definitely have more females than males, but
Yeah.
not like a crazy amount more.
Okay. So then when you do have a male that you're planning on moving around to different females, how do you manage his time and make sure that the females get bred early enough?
Yeah, sure. Sometimes that's the challenge. That's something that
Fair enough. Yeah.
we run into as breeders, right? And so most of the time, the week will look something like I'll feed them on I'll clean them on Monday, I'll feed them on Tuesday, I'll pair them up Wednesday, and then I'll separate them sometimes overnight, sometimes a couple days, and then I'll rotate them to that next female, either
Okay.
once they've had a day break or a 2-day break. And so the males I don't feed as heavily during breeding season.
Sure.
And so if they're not busy because they don't need to eat, then they're just in a female's cage probably. So most of the time I try and make sure that a male is in the female's cage, every 2-week period, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And most of the time, I try and make it more like 10 days, but sometimes it's hard when you are trying to split them 3 ways.
Sure.
And so, I do the best I can, or I try and leave them in longer for one period. But if I saw that they already bred, and then the next day it's like, well, he needs to go somewhere else, I'll take him out early. Maybe I won't separate everybody else, but I'll take him out, give him a break. That way I can put him back in sooner with somebody else.
Sure. That makes sense. So one thing that particularly with colubrids I feel is important, just considering their metabolism, is an adequate feeding regime during breeding. And with pits, I've heard lots of different philosophies on meal size compared to frequency. What's, I guess, maybe just from an overall perspective and then a breeding perspective, how do you go about feeding your adults?
Yeah, so I just feed my adults once a week. And so it's just once a week. They eat, small to medium rats, depending on their exact size. Some of the males, I don't keep my males huge. I've heard from other, I don't want to call them old timers, but, the guys that have been in the industry way longer than me,
Sure.
that, fat males make lazy males. And so I'm like, I try and stay away from that, keep them a little bit leaner. And I do get really good breeding results doing that. So I'm going to keep doing that. So some of them just eat small rats. But all my females, pretty much, they'll eat a medium rat. And they would take more than just one. But most of the time leading up, it's just one medium rat a week. Once they do lay their clutch, though, sometimes I bump them up to a little bit more than that, just for them to regain their weight and everything.
Sure. Okay. How long after the egg laying do you think it, or would you say it typically takes for that female to get back to where she was, for normal body weight?
Yeah. I mean, depending on clutch size, I'd say it takes a couple of them a couple months.
Okay.
And so if it was a smaller clutch, sometimes they bounce back really fast, honestly within a month. But I had a couple this past year that laid 20 eggs, and they just looked like there was nothing left. And so they took 3 months to really look solid again.
Okay. Will you ever give females like that the following year off, or are you typically seeing that even if they have that kind of like flat tire, giant clutch look to them, that they'll still bounce back and go again anyway?
Almost all of them just go again anyway.
Okay.
And most, I can't think of any that I've had that haven't really bulked back up enough that I felt comfortable breeding them again.
Okay.
Um,
Fair enough.
I can think of maybe one that I was like, all right, I'm going to give you the year off. She ended up ovulating and laying duds. So at that point, I was like,
Yeah.
well, if you're going to do that anyways, then.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, they definitely, I've only bred my Jani a couple of times, but they seem like snakes that are on the higher end of the spectrum of, of that fertility, that fecundity of, they're going, whether
Oh,
you
yeah.
want to or not. So, which makes it really nice because, with some different pythons and boas and stuff, if you're looking at a clutch or litter every 2 to 3 years, that can get, can test your patience, I'll say.
Yeah, no doubt.
So, but then, to stay on the feeding topic, how do you go about feeding your younger animals? Because this is where I've seen a lot of debate, not necessarily debate, but just a much more like a broader range of, I guess, philosophies within that. So what's your feeding like for your younger animals?
I mean, any of my babies that I've hatched so far this year, they're all just once a week still.
Okay.
Actually, I pretty much feed everybody in the room just once a week, just because I feed live,
Okay.
um, or pre-killed, and so
Yeah.
um, with that, we only go pick up once a week, and so that kind of also changes for me because I don't really do the frozen thawed right now. And so, but for any of those babies, they just get fed with the once a week, and it's just the one food item. Once they're like over a year though, then they kind of start to really pick up a little bit more, and I'll feed them like 2 food items at once.
Okay.
But it's still just the once a week. So it's a reasonable food item size. Like last year's babies now, they're eating two mice per feeding right now.
Okay.
And they're really starting to get some size on them. So, and then my 2-year-olds, they're actually on small rats now.
Okay.
So,
Cool.
but that's just once a week still. So some people say, yeah, okay, do it every, 5 days or whatever. But
Yeah.
for me, like mine are still growing quite well, and it's just once a week.
So
So
it's more just the volume within that one feeding as opposed to spreading it out to like 2 feedings a week or something like that.
yeah, I mean, before we actually had the rodents next door, because my parents actually they owned the rodent business before, and so
Mhm.
it was our own rodents.
Yeah.
And we just walked next door and got what we needed. But we
Nice.
have since they sold the business to a former employee, and so now
Cool.
we go get them from him, and he moved out. And so, anyways, but before I did do pretty much the 5-day split, so I would. Actually, it was more of a 4-day. I would feed on Tuesdays and I'd feed on Fridays. And
Okay.
their metabolism is fast enough that they could usually handle that as long as it's a reasonable sized food item.
Yeah.
Although I just wouldn't recommend it for babies that are under a year. I don't think it's worth
Okay.
pushing them until they actually are a little bit more mature. And I
Okay.
found that works pretty good.
So you said about a year old is when you really try to start ramping them up a little bit more.
Yeah, I need my holdbacks. I would like them to get up to size by the time they're 3.
Sure.
And so for me, yeah, I usually try and they usually respond more at that point, and you're not going to get too many problems with, if they like to start throwing up at that point, because that
Yeah.
can potentially be an issue if you're not
Sure.
feeding them correctly. So
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it does seem to me, at least with some other colubrids as well, that despite their higher metabolism, that can almost lead to more of a propensity for them to regurg. It seems kind of, a little bit counterintuitive, but I guess if they're used to that item passing through quickly and it can't because of how large it is or whatever, that their structure just isn't built for that necessarily.
yeah.
So interesting. So for all the time that you've been kind of building up your collection, did you have a framework that you were working on from the beginning of these are all the different species and localities and whatnot that you want to work with, or like lineages that you want to track down? Or was it kind of like growing as you were figuring all of that out? Like how did it all come to be to the scale and you know, how it looks today?
Yeah, sure. I definitely had some goals for what I eventually wanted to work with back when I pretty much started out.
Mhm.
But I mean, even now, there's other stuff that I'd love to work with. But I'm more limited by time and space at this
Sure.
point. So, you kind of got to pick and choose what
Yeah.
I'm working with. But
Sure.
I've since just recently acquired all the Mexican pine species and then the Guatemalan pine, that was like my my ultimate goal, we could say, of getting those.
Yeah. I saw those.
Which was pretty awesome. So I'm really grateful to be working with those now.
Yeah.
It was a big milestone for me. I definitely, I feel like I could say each big species is like my favorite. Go for bulls and pines. But there's just like little ones in each that I really really love.
Mhm.
Um, for the pines, it's those northern pines, those black and whites. I'm like, I
Yeah.
need those. Um, and then the bull snakes, I don't know how much you've really looked at them, but the tiger gene that I now am working with, the tiger bulls are just like that's like the coolest thing there is right now. I feel like in the bull snakes, and so
Yeah.
working with those has been. So I imported those from Europe. Uh,
Okay.
so I got those in 2020, I think is when I imported those, and they produced for the first time this past year, which was super exciting, and it's something that's not really in the United States right now.
Sure.
And so bringing those in was also like a really big deal for me,
Yeah.
and especially because you don't find them here, and so that's something that was like on my list of trying to get and track down, and I finally found somebody in Europe that was willing to export them here. And it was pricey, but totally worth it.
Sure.
And so there's that. I mean, some of the other San Diego Gophers, I actually imported a nice big box this year from the UK. Uh,
Okay.
that should have like some new blood in it, which is great.
Yeah.
Some other cool projects for that kind of stuff. There's other things that I would still love to work with.
Mhm.
But at this point, I think I really need to just dive into the projects I have before I overextend myself too much,
Sure.
and just kind of try and work out the projects I just have for now.
Yeah. It's almost like I sent you a copy of my notes ahead of time because you just hit everything that I had to touch on specifically on my notes. Um, but yeah, I wanted to talk about all of those Central American species. I mean, it's hard to beat the natural color variation within the Depi complex, and then within Lineaticalis, the pattern. I mean, what's it like working with the ones that you do, and then the Gibsoni that you just were able to acquire? Well, I mean, I had to pass on some a few months ago, just I just couldn't swing it at the time. But when I saw you post that you got some, I was like, okay, I can calm down. At least somebody, I know someone good has these in their hands.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, so the first ones I got were the Depi,
Mhm.
and so those northern Mexicans, and I could see the potential in them, but they're totally ugly ducklings, and
Yeah.
mine turned out just awesome. I love my adults, and so those ones really reeled me into those Mexican species like pretty hard. I did get some Depi. I don't know. It was maybe like 2 years or so after I had gotten the Jani, but
Okay.
those ones didn't really work out for me. And so I actually sold those at the time. And it was only this past year that I actually acquired them all. So I
Okay.
bought Depi again, which I really wanted to work with that vivid line. I don't know
Mhm.
how familiar you are with it.
I've seen
Um,
it for sure.
yeah, and they're like incredible. The summer phase and the winter phase hypos that they produce were
Mhm.
just like the most mind blowing animals that I had seen. And so I had always wanted to get back into working with those, but I didn't really have the funds for it
Sure.
anymore because they were asking like a couple grand um, for just
Wow.
one snake from that kind of stuff. And
Sure.
so I was like, all right, well, I can't swing that. I'm in college trying to, work as much as I can, and I can't do
Yeah.
that. And so, anyways, so that had to be put on the back burner, but
Sure.
we got back into it. So we got some babies to raise up, which is great. And then I was finally able to track down, the Linus Collis and the Gibsoni this year, which was just like a stroke of crazy luck, to be honest.
Yeah.
Um, because I can't even tell you how long I was asking people about both of those. It's definitely been a couple years. I know people that are breeding the Linus, the Gibson, a lot harder to find.
Sure.
Um, but I finally was able to get in like the good graces of some people that had connections. And I think it helped that people realized that like I'm not just some, I don't know, kid that's looking for something cool, or I don't really know how people perceive me in the industry entirely, but I think it's helped with me establishing more of a name for myself.
Mhm.
And people realizing, oh yeah, no, like she's definitely a pitch office person. Like she can
Yeah.
take care of these. She knows what she's doing. She's not just gonna, anyway. So I think that helped, and I was finally able to find some people that were able to hook me up with a couple of really awesome animals. So
Yeah, it does seem that the Pituophis world is definitely very much a good old boys club in some sense, and for better or worse. And I think it does say a lot about them that a lot of the old school herpers are so obsessed with them, as far as like they could choose anything to dedicate themselves to, and these are the snakes that they've chosen. It says a lot about it. But yeah, definitely, because I know that feeling well of being young in the community, and you know having someone finally take you seriously. It's like, okay, finally, I've been waiting for this. Thank you.
yeah, right. Just a little bit.
Yeah. Um, so with the Det by Det by and the Det by Jani, it goes without saying why those snakes are as popular as they are and kind of have the potential that they do. The lineated call is not quite so much because they're not as stunning from a color standpoint. Um, what do you how do you see their viability kind of market wise compared to Depi, when people like you and others kind of are able to make them more available to the same way that the Mexican pines are?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it will be interesting because I do hope to be producing them. It'll still be a few years, obviously,
Okay.
because the Linus Collis and Gibson I have are pretty young.
Mhm.
And so I really want to make sure that they are like solid before I try and, produce out of them, just
Yeah.
because I know how special they are and they are hard to come by. And
Sure.
so um, I think the Jani and the Depi are really great. They're way more commonly available, obviously,
Yeah.
and they're on the cheaper side, and so I think
Mhm.
that's also part of why. But and that's probably just because they're more widely available. There's a lot of other people that have
Sure.
those. Um, but the Linux Collis are obviously, they're much more expensive. They're probably, I don't know. Let's see, 3 to 4 times the price of what a Jani might be.
Sure.
And the Gibsoni technically are even more expensive than that. Like they're quite rare.
Sure.
And so I do think that once people really start seeing them and appreciating them, it's just like even on the Facebook groups, like you never see them. People don't post about them ever.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it is because like it's more of the older school people are the ones that have them and
Sure.
they're not on the socials quite as much. Um, and so maybe that's part of it.
Mhm.
But I think once we can start getting them out there more, I think that their popularity will definitely skyrocket because they're awesome and they're super impressive too. I
Yeah.
this other guy that I was talking to, he's been in the business for gosh, I don't know, 40, 50 years probably. So he's quite my senior. He's been around the block a long time.
Yeah.
Um, he's telling me that these lineage can produce clutches of like 50 eggs. And I'm like, there's no way. But
What?
like, he's seen it. Yes. They get
Hmm.
like 8 to 10 feet. Like, they are the most
I
impressive.
heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's insane. So,
50 eggs. I mean, maybe
yes,
if you said 30, I'd be like, but like you put them, I don't know. Hey,
I thought the same thing, but like this guy, he's not making it up.
sure.
So I was like, there's no way. Could you imagine a pit producing 50 eggs? That's crazy.
Yeah. I was talking with somebody earlier this year who said he got a clutch from a monocle cobra that I think was upwards of 100 eggs. He sent me a
Wow.
picture of it too. So I was like,
No way.
how is that even possible? I mean, this was a huge monocle cobra, and they were tiny. You know, they were small eggs. But I'm
Yeah,
like, oh my god! I mean, you think of like maybe a giant retic or a Burmese python having a clutch
sure.
like that, but especially like a lineaticalis, that's a thin snake. I mean,
Right.
you have to imagine even at 8 to 10 foot, that's still a fairly, because they're much more slender than bull snakes, at least to my knowledge. Correct me if I'm wrong, um, proportionally speaking. But I mean, hey, I hope to see you put a picture of a 50 eggs one day. That would be awesome. So
Yeah, no, I'm sure it'll be a number of years. And even then, perhaps that's just like lucky lineage, right? Of like
sure,
a very lucrative female, possibly. But
sure,
the other gentleman I was talking to, his clutch sizes were like 28 to, I don't know, mid 30s or so is what he's
wow,
personally experienced. But his buddy that had this massive female is the one that laid 50 eggs once, and it was a number of years ago. But that's just wild for sure.
yeah. I mean, just kind of adds more to like the fascination of these snakes. Just biologically, to be able to pull that off is pretty spectacular.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh man. Well, another kind of similar related species in that complex that we also, for a while, were almost on. You never really saw them until kind of this year. I feel like are the vertebralis. Do you have
Hmm.
any? You have vertebralis, correct?
Yeah, I do. I just picked up a pair earlier this year.
Okay, cool. I mean, could make a case for the like potentially the most beautiful color-wise natural Pituophis. I think. I mean, my gosh, some of those are hard to look at. They're so bright.
Yeah, no, yeah, I'd been trying to get into those actually for a while, but I tracked down some of the vertebralis. Hopefully, I'll get some Bimaris. Those ones are a lot harder to find. But yeah, my capes, they're pretty red, and they're awesome. I'm excited for those.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's one that I definitely want to add at some point as well. But to get to another topic that you brought up briefly earlier, I feel like anybody who has seen your stuff has seen those tiger bull snakes. So what exactly is going on there genetically? Is it recessive gene? Is it like a polymorphic type of thing? What's the tiger?
Yeah, it's I feel like I'm still in the middle of trying to figure it all out, to
Okay.
be totally fair, and that's pretty much
Sure.
what I've been telling people. It is pretty much acting like a recessive gene as of right now.
Okay.
And that is what I was told also from um, the person that actually like proved it first over in Europe. And so I was actually able to talk with the guy that first saw these, that produced them. And so, anyways, he says it's recessive, and so far it has seemed that way because
Okay.
I outcrossed it to a completely unrelated female, and there were 0 tigers in that clutch.
Okay.
Um, and so that does help suggest that it's probably a recessive trait.
Mhm.
Um, and then out of all the tiger to tiger breedings I did, everything's tiger, which could also still suggest possibly that it is more of like the the line bred kind of trait. But because of that other unrelated breeding, there was nothing that really hinted that it was tiger. In my opinion, the clutch looked very normal.
Mm.
So it will be interesting to see, in a couple years once I can breed those hets, back to see what I get out of them. Because I would really like to prove it out for myself,
Sure.
to be able to tell people like this is definitely what I've experienced and this is definitely what it is. Um, and so for me, it's this weird in between of it's something new. I'm pretty sure this is what it is. This is what I've produced so far. So I'm pretty sure. But anyways, no matter what is something that is just incredible. Definitely seems to be more of just, your pattern based trait,
Okay.
obviously. And so the red in it comes well, there's like, there's your normal generic reds, right? But there's also this second gene that's involved, which is apparently also a new gene in the pool, which is blood.
Hmm.
And that was explained to me by the gentleman as being, like a codom or your incomplete dominant, right? Is, I guess, what the technical term is supposed to be.
Yeah.
And so, which is super interesting. Although the super form for it hasn't been clearly defined just yet. And so that's pretty interesting. I did breed blood to blood. But yeah, I can't really tell you if there's a super as of right now or not. Might be one of those things that's not necessarily a visual super, And
Okay.
so, but there's visual differences between a blood and a non-blood. The bloods are much redder, and
Hmm.
so it's pretty interesting.
Interesting. So did the blood come from, is it different than like the Kingville red lineage, or did it pop out of it at some point in captivity? What's the differentiation there from like an origin standpoint?
Yeah. So from what this guy told me, his stock was from like Kingsville's originally. And anyway, he bred these two individuals together and out popped tigers,
Oh.
uh and then he was able to like breed that back after a couple generations, and he noticed that there was a difference in the babies where some were much redder, some had, red pattern bellies, that were patternless. I mean, so like a red patternless belly. And that's like one of the tells of it being a blood. And it held true. I definitely have babies that
Hmm.
there's tigers that have the patternless bellies that are red, and then there's tigers that have patterning on their bellies that aren't nearly as red.
Huh.
So there's clearly something else in the works there.
Okay.
But it's hard to quite put a finger down on that because it's not something that's been worked into anything else.
Hmm.
So it's hard to say exactly, but it's not like a hypo or anything like that. It does seem to be, like another erythristic kind of, gene, just like
Okay.
red. But it's not Kingsville red because it's not the locality based, but it seems to have come out of, that same kind of idea.
Sure. Huh. Fascinating. I have not heard about this until right now. This is very interesting.
It's pretty new, and there's a lot I need to figure out with it, and so, yeah, it's like one of those weird things where it's like, I don't know how much to advertise for it because I don't have the answers yet, but there is
Sure.
clearly something different about it.
Hmm. So did that gene come over here then solely with the tigers, or are you the only one who's working with it currently?
As far as I know, in the United States, I'm the only one that really has it, besides
Okay.
maybe the couple that I may have sold this year.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, I had let's see here. I think I have 3 adults that are bloods, and then I produced a number of babies that were bloods. One of the that outcross breeding I was talking about, the male I used was a blood, and there
Okay.
were bloods in that clutch though. So if it
Oh,
was this
yeah.
incomplete dominant idea, that
Then
tracks. That makes
makes sense.
sense,
Okay.
right? So it definitely seems to be something that's passed on, and visually you can tell it's different. So
Sure. Huh. Interesting. Well, you're in a very lucky position then with that gene, kind of can dictate how the rest of us are allowed to interact with that. Wow, that's very fascinating. So what do you have plans on taking this other directions, be it hypo, albino, patternless, anything else that you are trying to work this kind of the blood lineage into?
Yeah, I
Or is that
mean,
kind of maybe a little under wraps? We don't need to go into it if
yeah.
you don't want to.
I mean, there's definitely a lot of projects I have in the works, which is
Cool.
why I can't, expand
No
into
worries at
other
all.
things
No
because
worries at all.
yes, it was like I was gifted this nice new
Yeah,
thing and now I have to hold back a bunch of stuff to try and prove different things out, but it'll be interesting. I'm I'm interested to see how it all turn out. There's a few things that I think that we have talked about before um, working with the blood, but I'm hoping we can make some of these reds even redder with this gene. I do think since it does, I mean I think it's more of a erythristic gene, so it wouldn't really make sense to try and work it into other things as
sure.
much, just because red only looks good in so many things, right?
Right. Sure.
Um, and so obviously breeding it into the axanthics probably isn't going to do much good for me.
Yeah, it's very
But,
defeating.
uh
Yeah.
but we have some other cool project ideas in mind, but it could definitely be something where it does still need line breeding to help refine it more,
Sure.
um, is my guess, just because the red trait itself is that way, right?
Right.
And so, um, I think it might still be a number of years before we see something really cool come out of it,
Fair
but,
enough.
uh but yeah, I've got some cool ideas in the works.
Okay. Well, I'll be watching to see. But then I guess the other side of that would be taking the tiger and putting it on its own. Is that something that you also plan on doing? Because an Axanthic tiger probably would look awesome.
Yeah, no, don't worry, that's in the works too.
All right. I'll stop worrying about these things.
I
Well,
mean, at
cool.
this point, it's technically a double recessive is my understanding, so obviously
Okay.
that could also take a number of years. I was fortunate enough to have bought het albinos, tigers that are het albino. So I produced
Okay.
albino tigers this year,
Oh,
and
cool.
we got a nice surprise of white side also.
Oh.
So we produced white side tigers, which are very cool looking.
Hmm.
But we kept all of that back, obviously. Um, and then there was hypo also in the mix, which the line of hypo is up for questioning because I was told it's the Stillwater line, but it almost is presenting more like the Trumbauer line. So we're gonna have to do some serious test breedings to make sure that we know what's going on there too.
Okay. Got it. Interesting. Yeah. So those are all aspects of this that I'm still kind of trying to learn. The different hypo lines, are there significant visual differences or markers you're looking for to tell one from there? 'Cause I have Stillwater hypos. I don't have Trumbauer hypos.
Yeah, I mean, depending on who you talk to, a lot of people will say that the only true hypo is the Trumbauer line, and that
Okay.
Stillwater isn't really actually a hypo. But I mean, it is. It is a recessive trait and everything. And so, but they are pretty different, honestly. Some individuals, depending on what else they've been kind of mixed in with, though, can start to present sort of similarly. You can get some of your Trumbauers that are a little more yellow, and a lot of Stillwaters can have more of a yellow look. That's part of traditionally what they're kind of known for.
Yeah.
And so sometimes they can look pretty similar, but but yeah, they are different. Most of the time you can look at an individual and be like, all right, yep, that's Trumbauer, that's Stillwater.
Okay. Interesting. So something that I've heard and nothing really substantiated, but I want to hear what your take on it is that some of these morph lineages have been kind of inbred to the point of shrinking them almost. Is
Mm.
is that something that you've seen?
Yeah, I think one of the worst ones that have had a lot of problems is actually the Stillwater gene, which is
Okay.
unfortunate because that is by far one of the prettiest morphs out there. The Stillwaters are without a doubt one of my favorite. I actually wish that I had some really nice more of the real locality based still waters and not just like your hypo still waters.
Sure.
But that one has been known to have issues, and inbreeding after so many generations can definitely produce babies that are, like stubby. They're
Yeah.
just like shortened. And so, which, I mean, that's how it is with pretty much all snakes, right? If you inbreed too many times, then well, you're going to get problems at some point.
Sure. Do you have any projects that you have going on, and whether or not this is a secret or not, of like trying to, I guess, to put it in a word, fix some of these genes or outcross them to different lineages, or is that something that you're working on?
Yeah, the Stillwater specifically, we the original flames that my parents brought in, like 10 years ago, they must have been inbred too many times because we bred those together, and most of the clutches just were not good. The eggs weren't really strong eggs, and maybe that's a little confusing, but like they weren't fully calcified, which
Sure. Yeah,
was
that makes
part of the
sense.
problem. And it wasn't necessarily the diet, because the diet was great, just like the other snakes, and they did fine. But the babies had some issues, possibly some neurological things going on too, maybe.
Okay.
But basically just not stuff that's really great for the industry.
Yeah.
And so anyway, from those, I was able to pick up some very unrelated flames, which flames, for anybody that doesn't know what flames are, they're just red hypos, but it's the Stillwater line, specifically, that I'm talking about. And so because the Stillwater's been known to have issues like that, I wanted to outcross it. So I did this outcross breeding last year. I think I actually held back all the babies from it. I had 3 babies. It was a 1.2 from two clutches. So as you can see, like even the outcross breeding wasn't very lucrative either. So I held back 3 babies, and I'm growing those up. And so far they are like solid as can be, and
Good.
super pretty actually. So that's one that I've been working on. There's a couple other ones that I have that I am outcrossing. Some of the other the Sonorans that I have. So I produced this albino Christmas Mountain, which apparently has been. I'm still working to prove it for sure, but so far it looks like it is its own line of albino,
Okay.
unique to that locality,
Wow.
which is
Cool.
super cool. Yeah, I don't know how I got so lucky with that either, but I just bought this pair of what I thought were normals, and 4 years later, out pops albinos from the first time I paired them up.
Not
So
bad.
not bad at all. So because that will probably need to be outcrossed some, so I'm just breeding that to some other unrelated Christmas mountains,
Okay.
which is helpful. There's this other this other Sonoran I got lucky with. So I don't know how familiar you are with some of the Sonorans, but there's the Super
Not
Forks,
familiar. Okay.
and they're like the patternless Sonorans, if you've kind of seen those.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so anyway, I proved out in this other locality from Lajitas, which is I don't remember exactly how many miles away from Marathon, which is where the forks kind of originated. But
Okay.
anyway, Lajitas, it's pretty far out there in the other direction. Anyways, bottom line was that I produced patternless out of those in the Sonorans, which was purely locality based. And so it seems like this Super Forks gene of the patternless in the Sonorans might exist in more than just one locality, which is kind of interesting because they're like thousands of miles away.
Oh,
And
wow.
so,
Okay. Interesting.
yeah. So I'm working on crossing out some of that stuff because obviously my stock is pretty related.
Sure.
Um, and so making new stuff with all of that. Most of my bull snake stock I've gotten from enough different people at this point that my stock itself isn't running into too many other problems besides those flames. At least not that I can think of right now. But I try and be pretty mindful about not inbreeding too much within my own room. So
Sure. So we'll kind of on that topic of inbred snakes, one of my favorite pits that I know you have are the Kentucky pines.
Hmm.
Saw the video you put up of the one before you put it down information, and I think it was your male. I think it was a beast of a snake. That snake is
Yeah.
incredible. I
Yeah.
mean, how many Kentucky pines do you have?
I wish I could say I had more, but I just actually have the pair, and that's it.
Okay, that's fair enough. But I mean, could there be a snake with a more difficult to manage captive bloodline than Kentucky pine snakes?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it definitely is getting to the point where it's hard because you can't really bring in a lot new blood,
Right,
from that. Which is also going to be part of the problem you run into with the Gibsonite too.
right.
Um, and the Linnaeus probably as well, since we can't really import more from my
Yeah,
understanding right now. And so, but yeah, the Kentuckies, the the pair I have, luckily, is semi unrelated,
yeah.
which is great. I got them from the same people. At some point, I was hoping to purchase another one that is entirely unrelated,
Okay,
at least to mine, or at least unrelated enough, right?
sure.
Where it's like, 4 or 5 generations back. But but yeah, I'm hoping they'll actually produce for their first time this coming year. They're what are they? Are they 4-year-olds?
Yeah.
I think they're 4. So, well, so they're 4 right now. They're turning 5, I'm pretty sure, next year.
Yeah,
So I've been patient with them. They're another one where it's like they're so special that you don't want to screw anything up.
yeah. I can only imagine. So, yeah, I have a little pair right now, and I'm worried about screwing them up, and they're babies. So I can only imagine. Couldn't in your mind, what does it hurt to give my girl another year to really come into her full form as opposed to just trying to rush for some babies. Uh,
Yeah.
hmm. Yeah, I was talking with Craig Trumbauer about them, and he said that like they'll get like little stub tails sometimes, some of the babies, and that
Hmm.
he thinks that's like those are the animals that are the ones that probably should not continue on the lineage.
Yeah.
You heard that one with the Kentucky pines?
I haven't actually heard that that's been an issue with them, but I'm not surprised by that at all. So,
Hmm. Have you seen that in other types?
every once in a while, even in my room, you'll occasionally see one with like a stubby tail,
Mhm.
but it's usually like maybe one in the whole clutch. And so
Okay.
I think some of the ones that I've seen personally are just attributed to incubation issue or
Sure.
something. But I have seen other people that have talked about it and posted about it, but, I mean, I've been pretty meticulous about who I'm buying my animals from and making sure that the quality is good and finding
Yeah.
out information about the lineage as much as I can anyway, and so I think, I think people need to make sure that they're, um, researching really well before purchasing animals too, if that's their intention is to breed them. It's
Sure.
important to at least know a couple things beforehand.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, especially with anything that, like a Kentucky pine, that you can't just go into that blind to what it is. Those are really important snakes, and some of the morph stuff is more common now, but some of these locality type animals, they're those animals, and every generation that is produced is very important.
Mhm.
And I think there's enough good information out there to where a new keeper would probably come across it if they're looking at locality type pits. I'd hope
Yeah.
so. So, okay. Shoot. Yeah, it's always kind of the part of this that you don't love to think about is like, you know, whatever I can do, I might not be able to do enough to not let some of these new people screw up when they're getting into it. But
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, you gotta learn the hard way, I guess.
that is very true. That is very true. On the locality pine snake topic, your northern pines, those black and whites, they are spectacular. Are they locality specific, or are they just like ones that you've been selecting for the phenotype? What's origins of your northerns?
Yeah, so I actually got all of my black and white northerns from the same guy who has a couple of really stellar pairs, and
Hmm.
they are actually all locality based. They're the Ocean County
Okay,
locality,
cool.
and so that one apparently has been known to produce some of like the cleanest, high whites, and
Yeah.
that pretty much held true for me, at least. A
Okay.
lot of those babies also can kind of hatch out and look dirtier, we'll say.
Hmm.
But as they mature, they do brighten up a lot.
Yeah. Do you see a particular age at which your ocean counties are like going through significant change, or is it kind of just shed by shed, a steady brightening up, increasing of contrast?
Really, I don't know. It's been a while since I've really raised up, those ones because
Okay.
I mean, they're all just adults now. I don't have any
Sure.
juveniles.
Okay.
But I'd probably say like around like the 18 month to 2 year mark is probably when, you'll really be like those whites are cleaning up like the saddles and everything like that.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I have a small little group of ocean counties that I'm raising up, and yeah, every shed it's like, hey, that's a little bit better, but then there's one in particular where I'm like, any shed now, you can start cleaning that burning this up. So
right.
yeah, I mean, but just talk about a visually stunning snake to someone who doesn't even know anything about snakes. I mean, if you were the parent or the uninterested friend at a reptile show, I don't care who you are, you can't look at a nice Ocean County pine snake and not think that that thing is beautiful.
Absolutely. Seriously, those ones they reeled me in so hard. I I have 3 pairs of them,
Okay.
and some days that's not even enough for me. So
Yeah.
they're awesome and like you said, very stunning.
Yeah, and this the variety that you can get within that, especially like a monochromatic snake like that, it really is amazing how variable a black and white snake can be. But there's so many different looks of those Ocean County northern pines out there. It's really incredible.
Yeah, no, they're awesome. I have one female that's more red, I guess is
Okay.
what we've kind of been calling them.
Yeah.
And yeah, I haven't gotten a good clutch from her yet. Last year was her first year trying, but she was one of those ones that I said, I guess I didn't get early enough. So apparently the
Okay.
last week of February isn't early enough for breeding for her. But
She was ready to
yeah,
go.
that was a bummer. Or maybe it was a male problem. We'll find out this year. But anyway, it'll be cool to see, maybe what she produces because she has a lot of those like blush reds and pinks kind of coming through.
Yeah. I I'd have to imagine that on the babies, it would kind of take a little bit of time for that to develop, or do you think it would be present right away from like a more reddish female?
Since I haven't really seen them very much as babies, it's hard to probably say,
Hmm.
but I would expect them to probably look a little different as babies. Maybe they're even ones that look a little bit dirtier. Maybe they don't even look as clean. Or
Sure.
maybe they're the ones that look super clean and they develop more of that coloration over time. I'm not really sure. I couldn't quite say because most of
Okay.
my other 2 pairs that I've produced out of are the really high, clean white ones. And most of those babies, like, you can just look at and know, like, those are gonna be nice black and whites.
Sure. Fair enough. Well, I guess that's the fun of it of is those things that you don't know yet, learning along the way. I don't know.
Yeah.
I love snakes that go through color changes. It just makes it so much more fun than just like they're born and it's like, all right, well, there's that.
Right. Yeah.
So, not that there's anything wrong with that. I don't know. It's always fun to open that tub and see a fresh shed and lift the hide and have an entirely new snake under there. It's just to me, it's one of the most fun parts about being a snake breeder. But another species the that I don't have any of, I have not worked with them, but just the pure variety and all the morphs and whatnot are the San Diego gophers. Are there some strange genetics that don't work totally normal within San Diego? Because I'll see some clutches where like there are, I mean, like it's either like a triple recessive something in there, or just like they look like night and day from each other, where you can't even put together how these are even related. What's so I guess, what's the deal with all the genetics in the San Diego Gophers? They seem to be very dense with genetic potential.
Yeah, no, they definitely are. I mean, them being their own species, right? Of the Anactons, they have a ton of variability. They have a lot of morphs, I guess is what I'm saying, within their own subspecies category. And so there's like, gosh, how many different lines of just albino between T positive and T negative? There's like, you wouldn't know. Gosh, I don't even know. There's got to be close to like, I mean, I can think of like 6 right now.
Wow.
Between the two. And so there's a lot to just try to keep track of, even with just, one single, morph, basically albino,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, and then you have your anutheristics, of course, and then there's your striped genes, and there's that new patternless gene that's kind of out and about now, and yeah, I mean, and then there's obviously the super hypo gene, which is basically just another T positive, but we're just calling it super hypo, and so.
Okay.
And then there hasn't actually been proven to be a hypomelanistic gene yet in the San Diegos, at least not that I've really heard of. But yeah, there is a ton of variability in those, and there's some really striking looking snakes for sure. I definitely think some of my favorites are those envy snows. I mean, the contrast you get on those, if you get one of the really high contrast ones, man, there's just not a better San Diego than one of those.
Yeah, that's just what I find so fascinating is with a lot of species of snake that have, lots of different forms of albinism or hypomelanism, it seems to fade the snakes out from like a contrast standpoint over time. Doesn't really seem to be the case with San Diego Gophers. And that's just like, it's fascinating to me that just to see that dynamic within a snake of this, a hypo and albino T positive, where like come adulthood, the color might be a little bit different, but that pattern is still present when typically it would fade out with a lot of other snakes. Yeah, I don't know. I've never kept them, but the color palette potential in San Diego Gophers seems to be, I mean, potentially up there with bull snakes as far as everything that's going on there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would say so. I mean, there's just a couple of things that they're missing from each other, but
Sure.
yeah, the San Diegos they're awesome, and I feel like there's enough variability that if you just wanted to work with San Diegos, it would keep you busy, keep you entertained.
Yeah, I have to imagine so. So what's the deal with the zombie line or whatever that's called? Or doesn't that exist within some other morph? I wonder why you're laughing.
Yeah, because there's a little bit of drama maybe about that title, and so so maybe I need to choose my words carefully too.
All right.
On that. But
so whatever you would like.
Anyway, from my understanding, the zombie is just basically a fun title. It's not actually its own morph.
Okay.
And so it's like, I don't even know what I could liken it to at the moment, but anyway, it's still, so it's usually keyed when we're talking about the envy snows. Usually they call them zombie snows. But it's the same thing. It's all just envy snows. Just from what I'm understanding is they're calling the zombies the super high contrast ones. So the really dark patterning up on the neck,
Yeah.
And so they're calling those ones the zombies. But they're still genetically all the exact same thing. Just those are the higher contrast ones, from what I've understood and been told.
So just some level of natural variability within that gene.
Correct.
And then a nice little marketing campaign and a fun nickname to go along with it.
Yeah, pretty much. Which that's the problem when people start doing that, is it
Yeah.
It confuses people,
Sure.
and that makes it hard, like some people will start calling something an extreme, an extreme red or what have you. And then people think that extreme is like a thing, and it's like, no, we're just saying that it's like a higher red
Yeah.
animal, not that extreme is, anyways.
And that
So,
also makes it difficult when other species use those words for actual genetic traits as
yes.
well. I mean, like in ball pythons, and actually, this is you're the perfect person to have on here, maybe except for your parents. Ghost in ball pythons.
Yeah.
When
No
when I
doubt.
read ball pythons, that was like the thing that I was the most into, were the actual hypoaxanthics.
Mhm.
People just call the hypos ghost, but then if you say true ghost, it's like, mine's a ghost. What do you mean a true, like, that
Yeah, right.
always drove me crazy. It's like, what's wrong with hypo? Why can't you just call it hypo? Like, it doesn't
Right,
make it.
yeah. I feel like nowadays, at least in that industry, they finally kinda come together, and they pretty much just call it hypos now, which is
Oh,
which
do
is
they?
nice.
Okay, that's good. I've been a
Pretty
little,
much.
I've been disconnected, so that's good to hear.
Yeah, no, and so I think that's nice and that's appropriate. But yeah, trying to go between, the two species of pits to ball pythons, there are some confusing terms between the two, because that being one of them, but also like, back in the probably it was like the 90s, so definitely before my time, right? Well, my time in snakes. They definitely keyed some other terms for certain bull snake morphs or combos that are not, very helpful for us today.
Hmm.
And so, like, a ghost, what were they calling the ghost? It was, they were calling it something else. I can't remember what it was right now, but maybe it was a hypo white side or something. And it's like, that's
Hmm.
not, no. So now people today get confused about certain things like that,
Yeah.
or like the sun glow term we'll use from like the boas, right?
Yeah.
Which, yeah, okay, we know sun glow is a hypoalbino, but like, people in the bull snake industry, like we don't call them sun glows, first of all. So don't call it that. Just call it a hypoalbino. That way everybody's on the same page.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes I think we get a little carried away with combo names when we can
Sure.
keep it a little more simplified,
Yeah.
or at least key it something that's not related to something else that we already know, because it gets confusing really fast. A great
Sure.
example of that is the blizzard gene in the Pituophis world is extremely confusing for people. Um, and I would even say snow for that matter too. Those terms, snow in ball pythons is just an albino axanthic, which is really easy. And in bull snakes, technically, a snow is still albino axanthic, but in Sonorans, an albino axanthic is called a blizzard. Um, but then a blizzard in bull snakes is a 5 combo morph, and it's just, I love it. It's great. So explaining this to people is like, I'm so sorry, but
Well, I don't
yeah.
feel so bad about how I've been having a hard time kind of keeping all these morphs together now, because it's almost like it's set up for you to fail.
Yeah, I wish that we could just like have everybody be on the same page on this, but I'm constantly explaining to people that like, nope, this is this and this. They're not the same thing. Um, because that's obviously a huge problem in the entire reptile industry is mislabeling things, which can cause a lot of problems. And sometimes, it's unintentional, which, it's totally fine, obviously, but
Yeah,
it
yeah,
definitely gets confusing for people real quick.
for sure. I want to bring this question back up with Lisa asked. I think this is when we were talking about the zombie stuff. So I guess clarification on, does it seem to be somewhat of a like a line within the morph, or just kind of it pops up spontaneously genetically, or is it still too soon to actually know exactly yet?
Like, is the zombie its own line?
I guess And maybe Lisa, if you're still here and you could give us a little clarification, since it's been a minute since we were talking about it, so we can answer this question. I mean, I think, yeah, I guess what she's probably asking, unless she can clarify in the comments, as there's a little bit of a delay here too. I guess maybe like if you want to compare it to ball pythons, I guess this is a loose comparison, but like a regular hypo, like an orange hypo, which is kind of the same gene, but people with their orange hypos are like, no, these are better for this lineage purpose or whatever. Is that kind of what it is, or just that they're naturally, it's a variable morph and these extreme ones are just being called zombie, but that doesn't seem to be like a link. It just happens to be just like a random occurrence.
Yeah, from what I know, it's just its own natural variance.
Okay.
And so it's not genetically any different.
Okay, so like if you took like a zombie to a zombie, so to speak, you'd still have the same amount of variability within the offspring as if it was two typical snows. Yeah, I guess. Okay, there it is. So would it be appropriate to call zombie a line?
Yeah, I mean, you could refer to it as like the higher contrast sort of line, but keying it as its own morph isn't quite appropriate, I would say,
Okay.
because the morph itself is the envy snow.
Yeah.
And so, but if you're line breeding for that higher contrast, then perhaps it can be referred to more as like this is like the zombie bred line of the envy snows. And
Okay.
so I think it's fine, leaving zombie within the name as long as we're still calling it the envy snow because that is what the morph is actually titled.
Sure. So just not dropping what it is for the sake of this new marketing term.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough. I definitely see how that could be very confusing. Yeah, like Lisa said, and so have I, all kind of different line names for the Red Bull snakes. Because like you, and that's confusing to me sometimes too with anything, where when a morph originates from a locality in the wild, and especially like with a U.S. native species, it's easier for us to actually do that because with like ball pythons or carpet pythons or whatever, we have less of a way of verifying that. Yeah, because obviously Kingsville is the most commonly associated, but they're not all Kingsville. So what's the deal with that? Are there different red lineages that have come out of the wild, or are there just some that have been bred out so much that you kind of don't want to keep that locality term with it?
Right. So the Kingsville was locality based originally. And then obviously like the red Kingsvilles, so they're still locality based, the actual locality ones. But so many, there's two sides to this, right? And so there are lines of Kingsville Reds that are still legit. And that's just by people that were line breeding them for certain traits. So John Ginter was one who line bred his Kingsvilles to get some of those really dark, deep reds. And so you'll see a lot that are Ginter line that are still Kingsvilles. And then you'll see some, I think probably one of the other most common ones you'll see is the Cherry line, which is John Cherry. And he line bred the Kingsvilles just to look different. But they're all still Kingsvilles, but just those people bred them to, go for certain traits. So either the darker, deeper reds or maybe more of like your purple and oranges. And so while they're still Kingsvilles, there are some that are different lines that we do track. But there are also other actual like red localities too that are found. The Amarillos is another one that I've definitely seen pretty commonly. And so most of them are from Texas still that you'll see. But Kingsville is without a doubt probably the biggest one. Just the big issue with a lot of the Kingsvilles is so many of the people out there that are labeling them as Kingsvilles are mislabeling them, because it's not still locality based once it's outcrossed, right? So
Right.
if I bred a Kingsville to an albino, they're not Kingsville albinos at that point. They're red albinos that are from the Kingsville lineage, right?
Right.
And so, unfortunately, people also don't understand that difference there of it's not locality based once you outcross it. And so, but
Gosh.
anyway,
Yeah. I mean, that definitely, it makes it difficult to label, because then, like, let's say you are somebody who does want to keep the lineage clear and also be clear when you are outcrossing. It's like,
mhm.
how do I label these properly while still conveying that the red lineage is of Kingsville origin, although I'm not saying that this is a pure locality snake.
Yeah, right.
That's challenge. I don't need to do it, and I can see how challenging that could be. So
Yeah, no, it can be, but yeah. And so, like I said, sometimes just misinformation spreads easy when you mislabel things, but
sure.
that's okay. Sometimes that's just why you really need to make sure you research who you buy from too, to make sure that they know their stuff. If you actually care, that is.
Sure.
If you just want a cool looking animal, then that's awesome. That's great.
Yeah, and I guess right now I want to check in. How are we looking on time? Are you feeling good, or do you want to wrap this up sometime? And
No, you're good. Let's keep going.
okay, so the point you just made is an interesting one. What is it kind of like navigating a market that is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but from the outside looking in, I feel like there are probably a lot more people who are buying pits purely for pets in ratio to people who want to breed them than, say, something like a green tree python, where probably most people who keep green tree pythons at some point have aspirations of breeding them,
Mm-hmm.
at least from my vantage point. And like I said, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like a lot of people who are buying pits might truly just be looking for a pet snake. How does that dynamic play out in the market?
Yeah. I mean, definitely a good comparison, right? But I would also say that most people that want a pet probably aren't going to spend thousands of dollars on a green tree python.
Fair enough.
Um,
Yeah, good point.
so a pit looks more, more doable for a lot of people, I guess I would say. But I do think that some of the just the market price, obviously, for pits does make them appealing as a pet.
Sure.
Um, and personality and everything. Obviously, it's great that they're totally garbage disposals. So they do make great pets, because they're easygoing. They don't require a ton of attention either, which is
Yeah.
nice. You can go on vacation for a week, and as long as they have water, they're good. And
Don't keep them on
so
paper.
yeah, yeah. Um, but I would say, like, for me personally, in like our sales, it's I don't know, it's probably. Mm, I wouldn't say it's evenly split. I would say there's probably like 60% to other breeders and 40%
Okay.
to people that just want a pet.
Sure. Okay. That makes sense. I mean, for as long as you've been involved with these snakes, how have you seen the market evolve throughout those years?
Yeah, they were definitely cheaper when I first got into them. The pit
Mhm.
market has actually gone up some over the past couple years, and I really started tracking it more probably back, yeah, like 10 years ago, 2014. So I've been around it pretty consistently since then,
Okay.
and yeah, it definitely has gone up, I would say. But, I don't know how much higher it will really go, to be honest.
Sure. Do you see like lots of new people getting in, or maybe more just established people expanding how many animals that they have?
Um, well, I would say with some of the recent years, there was maybe a little bit of that recession that the industry kinda went through.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I think that did change a lot of people's plans, and so I would say that I actually saw some people cut down more, but I certainly didn't. I think I expanded the most during that time.
A great time
Um,
to people are letting stuff go cheap.
yeah, I mean, there was some good opportunities, and so, um, I mean, some people are expanding, yes, but I think it's more of those established people. But more of your hobbyists, I would say, were the ones that kind of took a step back or two,
Sure.
as far as that kind of goes, if that
Okay.
makes sense.
Yeah, definitely does. Yeah, because I think from kind of being on the outside, I feel like they are a lot more popular than they were 6 years ago, 4 years ago. Um,
Definitely.
and I think a lot of that has to do with, people, especially here in the US, they know a bull snake. If they're out west, they know a gopher snake, but, show them an Ocean County Northern Pine or a really nice adult Janai, you know, and then to also then like, hey, these aren't morphs. These are actually like naturally occurring looks. I think those are actually like they've hit more of a mainstream audience, I guess, so to speak, recently. Would you say that? Do you think that's kind of on track?
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. I mean, it they've definitely pitch office in general have definitely gotten a lot more attention, like you said, in recent years. And we've kind of seen a little bit of that trend even with our own YouTube channel that we started earlier
Mhm.
this year. And so we decided to go ahead and start that. And it's still small, we're growing.
Mhm.
Um, but it's actually amazing how many people have reached out that weren't even really into Pituophis or snakes in general. Um, and we've had a number of people be like, those locality based animals you're working with are just there's nothing else like it out there, and it's true. Like the ocean counties, I don't know how you couldn't like an individual like that. That's so high contrast
Yeah.
that I mean, and people don't even get to fully experience them because you just don't understand what they actually feel like. Like the pines, their keeled scales, they are so cool and just so impressive and usually just have like a very chill sort of attitude and they're just great. I could talk about them for hours, but yeah, no, I would say that the popularity for them has increased. They're slowly starting to get more appreciation, which is
Yeah.
really nice. It's great.
Yeah. Um, yeah. One thing that I've always liked when I've seen is, breeders at shows that, they have their babies, but then they also have like one of the adults there too. Um,
Hmm.
and I feel like that might almost be a necessary part of marketing some of these guys, especially, something like a Janai that doesn't look very good as a baby. Um, you know, for somebody who's a newer keeper to see if you had a 6 foot Ocean County on the table labeled not for sale in like a, centered kind of like eye catching display.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're walking through that show and you don't look at that snake, I mean, you should probably leave that show. You're doing the wrong thing.
Yeah. No doubt.
I mean, it is hard to convey the full like message of these snakes through some babies in deli cups. Um, I don't know. There's because it's worked on me, and I've been with people at shows, and they'll see that adult sitting there next to the babies, and like that turns into that. Like,
Hmm.
what are you talking about? That's insane. Like, and that thing is $300. Like, that adult doesn't look like it's a $300 snake. That thing looks expensive. Like, that thing
Yeah.
looks special. I don't know. It's just it's something that I personally hope continues to grow from a market standpoint, and I think it fills a niche that the hobby kind of needs of like that good pet colubrid hardy babies don't need day old pinkies like
Yeah. Right.
all of the issues that some of the other they're not like it's not like a cow king where they can just be holding the snake and it's going to like bite you and wrap you up spontaneously. It just
No
so many
kidding.
of the, so many of the problems that other colubrids can kind of pose to me, it feels like pits kind of fix a lot of those issues.
Yeah, I mean, you have, your individuals that still like to be little punks,
Yeah.
but yeah, let me tell you, when I clean, mom and dad, they have king snakes still and some
Mhm.
corn snakes, and man, I go through and I clean them and they're just like launching out of the cage left and right. I pick them up and they just, bathroom all over me, and I'm like, "You guys, I do that with my pits. I clean them, and the worst they do is look at me funny, or hiss at me a little bit, and it's
Yeah.
like, that is so much better than having to wash my hands all the time." No, they're really great, but I would definitely agree with saying that, it's people it's a disservice when so much of the business is done online today, right?
Sure.
Which is awesome. And it's great because it has definitely expanded the business.
Sure.
But going back to like the olden days where the shows were literally the pinnacle of like advertising and selling your animals, and being able to put that pit in somebody's hands for them to experience just how awesome they are, that definitely gets missed a lot because
Yeah.
I can definitely say it shows, when somebody comes up, they're kind of interested, they're not sure. I take that snake out and I put it in their hands and like they're sold. They're like, this is the one. So I definitely think that, people when given the opportunity to really, experience the animal, it they'll be surprised by how much they really enjoy them.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, from a pet keeper standpoint, there's nothing better than a healthy bodied, confident, active snake that you're never going to get bored of handling a snake that behaves that way.
Mhm.
So yeah, just like you, I could probably go on and on about how great I think these snakes are. One last locality specific thing I want to ask you about before we wrap up are type of bull snake that are particularly special to me because they're one of the few species that I can actually call damn near a home species. I grew up in Chicago, so not too far. The Kankakee bull snakes.
Oh, yeah. No,
Um,
I knew where you were going with that.
so, and you have some beautiful Kankakee bull snakes. Tell us about those Kankakee animals, and then I guess start with generally, and then I'll follow up with a more specific question, Kankakee wise.
Yeah, the Kankakees were actually my very first bull snake.
Okay,
So
cool.
yeah, I man, nothing, I say nothing beats, but it's true, nothing beats those awesome, just like black with the high yellow Kankakees, like, or the tricolor look. Man, I love those. I wish
Yeah.
that I could keep more of them, because yeah, they're that natural, occurring animal, and they are just incredible looking. So they were my first bull snake,
Okay.
um, and and my very first female, actually, she's the one that passed away this year unexpectedly,
I'm
um, which was really unfortunate. But
Yeah.
so I still have a pair, luckily, which is great that I'm still working with them. But yeah, really, their color just drew me right in. I really wanted that tricolor look, and just something about the high contrasting colors. With the northerns, it's the black and whites. With
Yeah.
with the kanks, it's the black and yellows, and there's something about that I'm just like, I'm all about it.
Yeah.
So they are definitely, I'd probably say they're actually my favorite locality bull snake.
Okay.
Um, I'm I'm a big fan of, like, the dark stuff, to be honest.
Mhm.
I think some of that is some of the best stuff out there, like, your Miami Stillwater ghosts are, like, my favorite ghosts, just because the contrasting colors is so awesome. It's like silver and black.
Mhm.
And so anyways, yeah, I got my first pair, and they produced as 3-year-olds, actually. Those things grew
Okay.
like weeds, and, that female, she was just awesome. She was, let's see here, I got her in 2016, and
Okay.
so had her a while, but yeah, and she was a young snake. Yeah, I wasn't really sure what went wrong there. It's kind of unfortunate, but yeah, I don't know. They're awesome. They were they drew me right in. I wanted to actually work with some more of the Indiana black bulls too, but I haven't got my hands on any of those ones just yet. But um, but yeah, I forget what locality exactly those
Yeah.
other ones were.
I would assume they would be more northern on a similar plane as the Kankakee.
Yeah, they're like the county over or two over, but I can't remember the name of the county right now.
Okay, because yeah, Kankakee is not far from the Indiana border.
No, it's not.
Hmm.
But yeah, anyways.
Yeah. So, what is the difference between the normal Kankakees and the tricolor Kankakees?
Yeah, so most of your normal Kankakees are more just like black all the way down with like the yellow patterning, you know.
Yeah.
But your tricolors, at least that's what they're called. They kind of have, they're still yellow, obviously, because the yellow kind of carries through no matter what. Um, but they go kind of black at the top, and then they go this really pretty brown. Sometimes even they get hints of red, which is
Mm.
super pretty. And then they kind of just go back black sometimes. So it's more of like a bicolor, I guess you could
Yeah.
almost say, but it goes through like 3 color changes. Maybe that's why they call it tricolor.
Okay.
I didn't name it that. So,
It's
uh,
another convenient name that's been appropriated from another type of snake that when you say a tricolor, you don't think of what that is. You think of a milk snake or a coral snake.
yeah, exactly, like your Hondurans or something, right?
Yeah.
But
Okay.
yeah, no. And the tricolors are incredible looking. Like I want to just drive myself up there and go find some myself, which would be an incredible trip that I have mentioned before, but I would actually have to look into seriously seeing what kind of permits you'd have to have for that.
Sure. Yeah, Illinois, they're strict about stuff. You can't just walk up and, you know.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of the reasons why I left Illinois. It's because the laws there are not the greatest. They're not the worst either, but they're not the best. But so do both of those appearances just naturally occur? Can they come out of any pairing, or the tricolors like kind of a how does that work with the two unique color variants?
Yeah, sure. So my female was more of a tricolor. She wasn't the most obvious tricolor though, but she
Yeah.
definitely had the browns throughout her body.
Yeah.
Which was really pretty. My male though, he is more of like your typical black and yellow, that's it
Okay.
kind of look. And so my clutch would produce both, some of both, but
Okay.
none of the really high contrast tricolors. I think that, those are probably produced more from the the nice tricolors anyway. So I'd say those you probably would more commonly see from line breeding. But I haven't done a lot of that myself. And so I do know a couple breeders that are working with some really nice tricolor Kankakees though, and they've produced some incredible babies.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I have some adults as well that I'm gonna try to breed this year. They're down in one of the cold rooms right now, but yeah, they're such beautiful snakes, just big, impressive, high contrast. This might be a blasphemous thing to suggest, but have they been used for outcrossing with any morphs historically?
Um, there's been some recent projects that have been in the works. I know a breeder, which I'm not. Some of it's under wraps, so I won't say too
Mm.
much about it. But I know that he's working on a couple of special projects with it. There's even projects that I might be starting in the near future with them. I've
Okay.
just never had extra females laying around to like burn on
Sure.
special projects just
Fair
yet,
enough.
And so, it because in bull snakes there's not a melanistic, right? And so the kankakee is like the closest thing you can get besides the axanthic, right? To a very like dark morph.
Sure.
Um, so it'd be interesting to see if any sort of line breeding could be done like an axanthic kankakee, what exactly could happen, because the kankakee definitely
Yeah,
seems to be very dominant when it
sure.
comes to, that sort of like very dark appearance. Um, so maybe, we could liken something to more of a melanistic using those sort of lines, which would be really interesting.
Yeah,
Um, but but I know that there are some other projects that are in the works. I think you could make, almost like a bumblebee kind of animal if you get like a higher yellow contrast going with those blacks.
yeah,
And that could be a really striking animal. You'd get like those really incredible looking Kentuckies that are just super yellow and black, but you get it in a bull snake.
yeah,
I think one of my favorite parts of the Kankakees are just like their facial markings. They have some of the most unique facial markings, in my opinion, which are super pretty. Um, but no, there are actually other projects that I've been thinking about. Because before I was like, no, their locality, let's just leave them in their locality. But at the same time, I'm like, wait, these could be used for so much more. Like, I really do think there's potential there. So,
yeah. And then not only that, just the genetic bank that those snakes provide. Um, yeah, that's always such a tough thing to navigate as far as like the philosophy behind it of like, okay, maintain pure locality or use pure locality to keep morphs healthy longer.
sure. Yeah,
And
no doubt.
I think if you can do both, that's probably best case scenario.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then also at least to some degree just maintain the uh I guess I'm getting tired. My words are escaping me, but like making sure that that lineage information stays with those snakes, kind of longer term as well. I don't know. I guess that's always kind of the debate of like the purist versus the morph people of like, if you could be a purist, sure, but what are you, at the end of the day, you're going to end up just bottlenecking your genetics at a certain point,
Hmm.
no matter what.
Yeah.
In the sake of purity, you're making snakes that are genetically inferior just by the sake of inbreeding. So
Yeah,
uh,
no doubt.
yeah, but I think it'd be cool to see how that, if and when Kankakees make it out into some of the morph combos, what impact it has. Because like you said, with that dominant appearance, you'd have to imagine that it would be significant and probably
Hmm.
pretty cool too. I don't think you're making anything worse by adding Kankakee blood into it.
No, definitely not.
Cool. Well, as we creep up to the 2 hour mark, I don't want to keep you too late. I know that I know how busy you are. Um, but I guess the last thing is, are there any new projects that you're eyeing in the near future? Is like, this is what I need to add to the herd next.
Hmm.
Is that another one of those secret questions that we might just have to see one day on Instagram or YouTube?
I try to keep the Gibbs eye under wraps for so long, and Spencer just he's like, "Why don't you want to show them?" I'm like, "Because it'll be a cool reveal." But I mean, the Bimaris, I mentioned it earlier, so it's not really a big secret. But the Bimaris is something that I'm hoping to work with um, sometime in the future. I already have a breeder lined up who's supposed to be producing them hopefully next year.
Okay.
So if that works out for him, then hopefully, I know he has a list though, so we'll see where I end up for that.
Yeah.
But I mean, honestly, over the past 2 years, I've acquired most of what was on my checklist,
Okay.
and so I'm not sure if there's a whole lot more that I'm after. Am I missing something big?
I mean, our tiger stuff.
Yeah, but I don't think there's like anything else I'm really looking to like buy at this point. There's a lot I haven't really even showed very much.
Okay.
It's hard when you have so many, but yeah, I don't know if there's really much more. I know I might pick up a couple other variations, some more depi maybe to help strengthen some of those other vivid lines that I'm working with. But other than that, that's the thing. I have most of everything besides some of those California stuff.
Good place to be.
Yeah, I mean,
All right. Well, I think that's a great note to wrap up on. Well, thank you so much for your time tonight, Summer. This was an awesome talk. I got a lot out of it. I bet everyone listening did as well. So where can you be found online, and how can anyone keep up with everything that you got going on?
Oh yeah, best place is just like our social media, which is just Summer Snakes. So we're on Instagram or we're on Facebook, and then like I said earlier, we've got a YouTube channel going now, and that's just Summer Snakes as well. So just follow us on there, and we pretty much update something on Instagram and Facebook. I mean, a couple times a week, and then
Mhm.
releasing YouTube videos once a week right now. We're keeping up with that. So, I mean, keeps most people updated.
Yeah, awesome. And then how about availability? Where can people find animals that you have for sale?
Yeah, right now we're just advertising through Morph Market actually. And
Okay.
so I'm revamping the website right now. It's gonna have a big release coming out at some point. I've
All
been
right.
working on it for a while, but and then that'll be another place where people can go and hopefully find some resources for Pituophis, obviously.
Great. Wow. Well, awesome. Everyone, please go check out everything they got going on. And again, thank you so much for your time tonight. This was an awesome talk, and this might be one I have to listen back to again because there's a lot of information jam packed in here.
Oh, well, thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So if you want to stick around for a minute, I'm just going to quickly close the show out. But again, thank you so much for your time. This was an awesome conversation. All righty. All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in tonight. For all of us here at the Trap Talk Reptile Network, please subscribe here on YouTube, the audio platform, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Buzzsprout, all of those good things. Subscribe and 5-star review would be greatly appreciated. For me, you can find me on Instagram at Scrub Shepherd, Stephen Kush on Facebook, and doing this show here every single Wednesday. So with all that stuff said, thank you to everybody who tuned in tonight, and I'll catch you back here next week for a new episode.